Hi guys, it's Tiamra. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about domestic violence and intergenerational trauma. So I think it's time to move past all of the intense, comprehensive information that we've been kind of entrenched in for the past couple of weeks. We've been talking about trauma, which involves the ACE score, the resiliency questionnaire. Then we've talked about psychopaths. We talked about the neurochemical process of the brain. And so now I think it's time to move into the relational aspects, considering that you guys have a little bit of neurological information and neuroscience under your belt. So today we're going to be talking about domestic violence and intergenerational trauma. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. For those who are subscribed and for those who are new, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button so you can stick around with us, learn things, suggest topics, and continue to grow in all topics relating to trauma and relationships. The benefits for you today in this video is that you're going to learn about domestic violence, and then I also want to tie it back to intergenerational trauma. So let's just go ahead and jump into that topic, okay? So I have been a therapist for the past 12 years now. And one of the things I started out doing in my career was working with adults. And I worked with adults who were in what's called an IOP program, so an intensive outpatient program. And in that program, I dealt a lot with women who were domestic violence survivors. I met with men who were being abused by women. I also met with both genders who had schizophrenia and psychotic disorders. And then I also met with adults who had personality disorders like borderline personality or histrionic personality and even narcissism. And in those programs, the IOP programs, the intensive outpatient program, I ran into a lot of people who were dealing with domestic violence. And I realized after having so many conversations with them on a daily basis that a lot of the domestic violence was the result of intergenerational trauma. And that's something that we don't focus on a lot, right? We just focus on what's happening in that relationship, and then we focus on the two people in that relationship, but we hardly ever look at the foundation of where that behavior is coming from. So I want to point out just a little bit of a correlation between domestic violence and intergenerational trauma. And then I want to give you guys some of the signs that you are being abused domestically, okay? So intergenerational trauma, I will post the video that I did up here on intergenerational trauma a couple weeks ago. And then there's previous videos like from last year. So I encourage you to go ahead and check those out. And I'll try to post them up here and at the end of the video. But intergenerational trauma, I describe it as trauma that has occurred over the lifespan and over generations, that has been unresolved, that has been emotionally and psychologically destabilizing, and that has resulted in emotional and psychological harm. It's trauma that we absolutely have no coping skills to deal with at the time. So let's say, for example, in your family, you have a great-grandmother who was raped and molested by her father and raped by her spouse later in life. She never got treatment for that and continued to suffer in the relationship that she was in her marriage. And she continued to have to communicate with her father who molested her. Let's say she doesn't get help. Well, she has a daughter, and because of her insecurities and because of her mental health issues and because of her emotional dysregulation, she then impacts her daughter. Her daughter finds out that her mother was raped and molested, and now she's angry. She's angry with her grandfather who molested her mother, and she's also angry with her father who raped her mother. Let's say that daughter doesn't get help and she has a daughter, okay, then she's going to pass on some toxic behaviors and mindsets to her daughter, and it continues to cycle and perpetuate over time. That is intergenerational trauma. The trauma starts at the very beginning of the family line, and then it continues. Now, intergenerational trauma, as I discussed in my previous video, can also be cultural, right? Slavery, massacres that happened amongst the Native Americans who came to this country and tried to build homes and livelihood. African Americans who were slaves, ancestors who were slaves, right? So intergenerational trauma can also be cultural, but it can also be familial as well. All right. So let's say that intergenerational trauma is present within your family. Well, you jump into a relationship with someone and everything is great until that individual begins to show you their true selves, right? They begin to show you who they really are. They begin to show you what their values really are. They begin to show you that they don't really love you as much as you think they do. So then boom, here you are hit with trauma yourself, domestic violence. Now, domestic violence is any physical, sexual, emotional, or any other type of abuse that happens in the form of intimidation, right? It's something you don't want. It's something that you have become a victim of. Okay, more women, according to research, tend to be domestic violence survivors. Now, men do get abused, but not at the rates that women do. Okay, so I think that's important to throw out there. So let's just go ahead and look at some of the signs and symptoms of a domestic violence relationship. So we have all this intergenerational trauma. You jump into a relationship and boom, what's the first thing that happens? Well, the first thing that happens is codependency. Okay, I didn't know if I wanted to mention that first or something else, but let's just go ahead and start with codependency. Codependency is the idea that you need that other person to function. You need them to function. They need you to function. You guys aren't two individuals in love who can separate when you need to. You're always like this, and that can become toxic. You can also become emotionally dependent to the point of losing your own identity, your own feelings, your own thoughts, your own behaviors, right? You begin to kind of take on their emotions, their thoughts, their values, their emotional way of tolerating distress. And so you lose your identity to take on their identity. Okay, so codependency. The next one is manipulation and emotional leverage that's being used against you. Okay, so domestic violence relationships are often based on emotional leverage. I'm going to use the kids against you. I'm going to use the fact that you're married to me against you. I'm going to use the fact that you can't afford to live on your own against you. I'm going to use the fact that you need me for financial support against you, right? Even some people go so far as to use pets against their partner to emotionally and psychologically control them. It's disgusting, but it does happen, okay? The next one is control and willful intimidation, okay? In domestic violence situations, that individual who is doing the abusing the majority of the time or doing the abusing alone tends to want control. It stimulates them. Remember when we talked about sociopaths in this video up here, I said that narcissists and sociopaths and psychopaths have a certain need for stimulation and energy and fame and control. And it's like this desire has to be met. And so people who are abusing somebody else within a relationship, or a person who's abusing their spouse, they need that control. And so they utilize willful intimidation, right? It becomes a tool, a mechanism to control and harm and kind of keep in their place that individual. It really is a manipulation and control tactic, okay? The next is cyclic behavior and dysfunctional dynamics. That's another sign of domestic violence. You may not have to be physically aggressed by the individual who's abusing you. You may not have to even be sexually abused by the individual who's abusing you. It could just simply be a cyclic pattern of dysfunctional dynamics. You guys have no healthy communication, whoever that is, you and the other person in the relationship. You have no boundaries, no clear rules about how the relationship is going to work. There's nothing. You guys are just kind of working off of emotions and dysfunctional thought patterns. And so when that happens, things blow up really fast. So domestic violence situations often include cyclic patterns that are dysfunctional. Also dysfunctional dynamics. So you kind of develop a pattern in that relationship. You do something, they do something. You say something, they say something. It's this back and forth dynamic that you develop with a person. That's why treatment for women and men who are in domestic violence situations is geared towards undoing the damage, right? Unraveling the damage and helping the individual understand that this is a dynamic. You do something, they do something. And the codependency also has to be minimized in the relationship, and that takes a lot of work as well. Now, let me also throw in here as well that, if you're unsure what is domestic violence, all you have to do is look up domestic violence laws and go through the criteria. All domestic violence behavior typically equals a felony or misdemeanor. So there's always some kind of legal component to domestic violence. It's not just somebody being mean. It's somebody who is superseding and far exceeding being mean, and they are beginning to show criminalistic behavior and engage in actions and behaviors that are harassing, that are assaultive, and that can result in a felony and a misdemeanor. So it's pretty serious. An individual who has been the victim of intergenerational trauma will have a very hard time coming out of a domestic violence relationship because they have developed patterns of codependency, they have developed cycles of dysfunctional beliefs and thoughts, and they have also been the victim of dysfunctional dynamics within their family. So it's going to make it a lot harder for them to jump out of a romantic relationship, right? Or it's going to make it harder for you to come out of a romantic relationship if you were originally the victim of intergenerational trauma. It's pretty deep, guys, and it gets a little bit more serious than this. I will try to come back and also mention some things about this on Wednesday. We're going to talk about what ways to deal with a narcissist and how do we deal with an individual who is abusive to us in a relationship, whether that's family, work, friends, romance. I'm going to talk about a couple of things that you can do to protect yourself and gain the upper hand in the relationship. Because if you're being abused in any kind of a relationship, a coworker relationship, a romantic, a family, a friendship, it's abuse, okay? And you want to be ready for it. You want to also be able to approach that individual from a therapeutic perspective so you can gain the upper hand. So we're going to talk about that. Thank you so much for the viewer and the subscriber who mentioned that. So we will get to that. In the meantime, guys, if this video was helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with somebody who may benefit from this information. And stay tuned for Wednesday. We'll be talking about the next topic. All right, guys, I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.